By the early 1970s, the depiction of sex and sexual themes in American movies had become more explicit than it ever had been before. Subjects long considered taboo could now be depicted on screen, to the point where even porno chic briefly crossed over into the mainstream.
I like Emmanuelle for its beautiful lovemaking scenes. I admit it, this film did exactly what it was designed to do, turn me on.
I have to admit it turned me on too. I found it sexy.
Into this lusty landscape arrived a film that at first glance seemed perfectly aligned with the zesty new zeitgeist. Released in 1973, Some Call It Loving is a film that seems to deal with sexual obsession, but it's hardly a sexploitation movie. It's difficult to say exactly what it is. It tells the story of an unusually wealthy jazz musician who comes across a bizarre carnival sideshow that features a young woman who's been asleep for 8 years. He purchases the act, and by extension the woman, and takes her to his oceanside mansion, where he lives with 2 other women with whom he engages in ritualistic role play. Eventually, the Sleeping Beauty wakes up, and things get even weirder. Despite its kinkiness, the film is barely erotic. It's surreal and strangely somber, mysterious but surprisingly earnest. And not only is it difficult to pigeonhole as being part of any genre, it's difficult to see how it fits in with the other films of its producer, writer, and director, James B. Harris. Harris is best known as half of the Harris-Kubrick partnership, where he served as the producer of 3 early Stanley Kubrick films. With the production of Lolita, Kubrick had relocated to England, and after the film's release, his partnership with Harris soon came to an end. Harris remained in Hollywood and received, in his own words, Kubrick's blessing to pursue a career as a director, which he did, writing and directing 5 films over a 30-year period. A Cold War suspense thriller released a year after Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, and a few decades later, 3 crime dramas. And then there's Some Call It Loving, a film that Harris himself has suggested may have provided some inspiration for Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. In fact, there are so many interesting parallels between Some Call It Loving and Kubrick's work that I can't help but wonder if Stanley Kubrick himself was somehow involved in the making of this film. A key piece of music in Some Call It Loving is a song titled The Very Thought of You, as performed by the great Nat King Cole. It's important enough to be featured in the film's opening credits.
It's just the thought of you.
The song itself was composed and originally recorded in 1934 by British jazz musician Ray Noble, featuring vocals by Al Bowley. It went on to be their signature song.
The very thought of you, and I forget to do.
They recorded many other records that same year. Among them, Midnight, The Stars and You, and It's All Forgotten Now. 2 songs that feature prominently in The Shining.
Midnight, were the stars and you.
Of course, this could be just coincidence, or maybe a case of 2 filmmakers having a conversation. In Some Call It Loving, Robert Troy is a wealthy, privileged man. As such, he has the means, and the free time, to indulge his sexual fantasies, which mostly involved ritualistic role play, where he's often involved only as an observer.
What's wrong with him? He isn't doing anything.
He can't seem to find what he's looking for, judging by his narrow range of expression, which can be interpreted as alternately morose, frustrated, or bored. In Eyes Wide Shut, Bill Harford is also a wealthy, privileged man. After his wife Alice reveals to him one of her own sexual fantasies, one not involving him, he spends an evening on a pricey sexual odyssey that is also unconsummated, but culminates in a large-scale display of ritualistic role play, where he, and apparently many of the attendees, are merely observers. When the Sleeping Beauty awakes, she tells Robert about her dreams, which may actually be memories.
A man, someone I'd never seen before, was kissing me. I I don't know how he got there or anything, but he was kissing me and I couldn't seem to do anything to stop him. Then it would start again. Only in this dream, lots of strange men would kiss me and touch me. And I couldn't stop them.
Meanwhile, Alice tells Bill about a similar dream.
I was fucking other men. So many. I don't know how many I was with.
Robert is excited by the prospect of having a genuine relationship.
When she talks, I listen to her. Not only did I listen to her, but I responded honestly to what she had to say. I haven't done that for a long time. And I realized I don't need this anymore. That I still have a chance. That there's still something real left inside of me.
Although he tries to escape his fantasy world with his newfound love, he fails. Robert is drawn back into the world of illusion, and he sends Sleeping Beauty back to sleep. At the end of Eyes Wide Shut, it appears that Bill and Alice may escape a similar fate, although it's not 100% certain. What exactly is at stake here? I think it's becoming increasingly clear today, as technology creates newer and more powerfully convincing means of gratifying our fantasies. When these diversions overtake our hold on reality, it distorts how we look at each other and leads to greater social fragmentation. The need to have all your fetishes served to you on a platter, just the way you want it, can be problematic for all parties involved.
That was very good, but it's not quite right.
Okay.
Fight! 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 How was that?
It's good, but it's still not working.
It's a lot like being an obsessive, overly meticulous film director, given to endless takes. Is it a stretch to suggest that Kubrick was possibly involved in the making of Some Call It Loving? In interviews, James B. Harris has called it a very personal film, and that he came across the short story Sleeping Beauty by British author John Collier while doing research for Lolita, and eventually adapted the story into a screenplay that conveyed his feelings about his own past relationships. There's a wealth of allegations regarding Harris and Sue Lyon, who at age 14 portrayed Lolita in the Kubrick film that Harris produced. In the early 60s, Washington Post columnist Dorothy Kilgallen suggested that Harris was in a relationship with the underage actress, a direct reflection of the themes in the film itself. More recently, musician Michelle Phillips, who grew up with Lyon, has been more direct as to what Harris may have done with the child actress. To this day, Harris has refused to discuss the matter. Sue Lyon died in 2019 without ever addressing it. In Lolita, we see Claire Quilty's crib, a large decadent mansion cluttered with knickknacks and high art. Robert Troy practically lives in the same place, a palatial man cave. After the death of his wife, Humbert hits the open road with Lolita, intent on having sex with her. Robert Troy whisks Sleeping Beauty away from his magic castle and hits the open road, apparently intent on consummating their relationship at a roadside motel with an interesting name. In an outtake from the film, Robert meets up with an old flame, a former cheerleader who has now become a nun. This obvious bit of exposition was wisely cut, but it does provide us with an underlying cause of his obsessions. In the novel Lolita, Humbert explains away his particular perversion, linking it to the trauma of having lost his first love when she died at the age of 14, thus keeping him in a state of arrested development. This explanation was cut from the film version. In the book, Humbert's dead childhood sweetheart is named Annabel, a direct reference to Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee, a poem about a dead woman. Its influence can be felt throughout Some Call It Loving.
It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me.
The very thought of you.
Annabel Lee also served as inspiration for the 1961 film Night Tide. It's the story of a guy who falls in love with a woman who also happens to be a sideshow attraction, in this case, a mermaid. The film shares a dreamy atmosphere with Some Call It Loving, as well as similar themes of desire and fantasy projection.
I'm living in a kind of daydream.
Night Tide was written and directed by Curtis Harrington, who was a friend of Stanley Kubrick in the 1950s. Around the time Kubrick was working on his first feature, Harrington was shooting this short film titled The Assignation, which includes a protagonist with very familiar features.
The mere idea of you, the longing here for you, you'll never know.
When I sit back and consider all of this corresponding trivia, I can't help but come up with my own alternative narrative, where Kubrick, having long escaped Hollywood for the English countryside, had one of his old associates direct a movie for him by proxy in Southern California. At the same time, I can't ignore Harris's alleged personal history as the possible impetus behind a film that could well be a confession, an excuse, or a cautionary tale. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. There are many more layers to this film. We haven't even touched upon Tissa Farrow, Richard Pryor, and the links to David Lynch's Lost Highway. And I'm sure there's plenty more that I'm not aware of. But I believe it's a film that will grow in stature. It addresses our current age, where increasingly alienated people are trapped in increasingly sophisticated fantasy worlds, leading to greater isolation and dangerous delusions. As for the authorship question, I conclude this video with something James B. Harris wrote soon after Kubrick's death. He has been with me through all my films thus far. Maybe now you understand why, after Stanley has passed on, I don't miss him. How could I? As I said, he's been with me for 45 years, and he'll be with me until the day I die. And after that, who knows? Maybe we'll wind up in the same place.